but the overall paradigm shift is what I think a lot of people are missing, which was including myself. It's about having an entirely new philosophy of how we define aging, how we can understand the fundamentals of what we can do to offset it. I think the big distinction that a lot of people still don't understand, which I would put myself in this category when I first started making the film, is the difference between health span and lifespan. They're two completely different approaches and also different problems.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Game Changer Podcast. My name is Michelle Dutro. I'm your host, and I am joined today by a documentary filmmaker that I am thrilled to chat with. If you have followed me at any point in time, forget about following me. You know I own a retreat center. You know I have been in the longevity business for more than 25 years. So this is such an important topic to me. I know it is to anybody listening because this sort of is all the latest buzz over the last couple of years. But let's get a little bit into his background. David is out to explore the science of longevity, biomarkers, the research, the protocols, but what he uncovered challenges some of the core assumptions driving that entire space. You're going to want to stay tuned for this. David Donnelly is the creator of the documentary Forever Young, coming out this summer. We'll see if we have some dates, where he spent years working alongside leading researchers from institutions like Harvard, Stanford, and the Buck Institute to understand what actually impacts how we age. But this conversation goes beyond supplements, routines, and optimizations. It raises much deeper questions, whether pursuit of living longer is missing something far more fundamental about how we live in the first place. David, welcome to the show. What did I leave out that people need to know about you before we dive in?
I think that's a great summary. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously nobody has seen this yet because it hasn't come out yet. First of all, when do you expect it to come out and where can people stream it when it does?
We have had a couple of screenings. We had a screening at the Mill Valley Film Festival, which is where we premiered. It sold out, and we took the audience award for active cinema, which was great. And then we've done a couple of small screenings, including at Cambridge. As far as its major release, it looks like it'll be at some point this summer. We don't know exactly when yet. We should be getting that information any day now. People will also be able to pre-order it very soon, probably within the next week. Apple is going to be the first platform people will be able to watch it.
Okay, fantastic. So give us the overview of what this documentary even is and what interested you so much about this topic that you spent so much of your life trying to get to the bottom of it.
I think, like a lot of people, I just started to see all of this stuff pop into my newsfeed. And then you started to hear this phrase, longevity. And I was just really curious as to whether or not, if this was BS, how much of this was true. Even if a portion of it was true, then what we're living through is absolutely remarkable. So I started to dig in, and the first shoot that we did was at the Buck Institute, which is like this spiritual type experience. If you walk into it, it's like a cathedral type atmosphere, beautiful architecture. And there's just dozens of amazing people that are doing real science when it comes to aging. And so after that first shoot, I was like, wow, this is really happening, and it's happening in our lifetime. And then so that started to bring up more questions. And my process, at least the way that it worked for this film, we didn't know where it was going to take us, and we didn't know how it was going to end. We do have a science fiction narrative, so there is a dramatic storyline that, of course, was scripted with actors. But outside of that, we really let the science tell the story. And we started interviewing people, and then they were giving recommendations of where we should go next. And then we came back and did more interviews to follow up with questions. And so almost 4 years later, we have Forever Young, which runs about 88 minutes. And we have more than 100 hours of footage behind that. So you can imagine just all of the topics that are covered in the film. We're able to do deep dives into each of those, which is also why we started a Substack, because the people that did watch it, the first thing they have is questions about everything that's in there. What do I do? How do I put this into action? So it inspired a lot of people to want to start or continue their longevity journeys. And the film to us is kind of a starting point to get people to understand, A, this is really happening, B, what does that mean for you? And C, what does that mean for all of us as a society, as a nation, and as a species?
Okay, we're gonna jump into those as this conversation progresses.
Sure.
I want to back up. You said you started by saying, "Man, maybe this is just BS. Let me go figure it
Yep.
out." So, is there anything that you can share with us? And we're not going to give it away because I do obviously want people to watch your film, but that maybe people are putting too much importance on that you have found out through your research really isn't kind of the bang for the buck. Like, of the things you're doing, maybe not to the point of calling it BS, but this thing isn't the end all be all that we're kind of told. Was there anything that hit that side of things?
I think not necessarily one or two things, but the overall paradigm shift is what I think a lot of people are missing, which was including myself. It's about having an entirely new philosophy of how we define aging, how we can understand the fundamentals of what we can do to offset it. I think the big distinction that a lot of people still don't understand, which I would put myself in this category when I first started making the film, is the difference between health span and lifespan. Because they're two completely different approaches and also different problems. So health span is how can we live better years with our loved ones later in our life? How can we delay this onset of aging? So it's really focused on prevention. It's focused on, not getting sucked into sick care and having a more active life to where you're on top of this kind of stuff. And then you've got lifespan, which is the maximum amount of years that we believe a human can actually live. And so the scientists that are trying to solve that problem are the ones that we know as the immortalists, which are the ones that are very famous because, of course, it's very clickable, interesting stuff that they're studying. And I think it's important to have all of those different people because it is a revolution. And so you've got lots of different approaches. And I think it's important that people are pushing the limits, but that should not be confused with the scientists that are doing day-to-day research to make small steps forward in our understanding of aging, which is totally different than someone that's trying to create a treatment or a pill to extend our lifespan and try to live to 150 or 200.
Right. And to that end, let's stop on that one since that's where we are. And I run across people, again, this is actually my industry, so people that say, "Hey, can you help me live to be 150?" You know what I mean? "Hey, here's some things that I've learned. What are the things that you do?" And always with anything, I don't care if you're saying you want to get to 150 or you're talking about taking a B12 shot. Always the thing is why. What's your end game? What are you after? And you know that line, be careful what you wish for. So if you live to be 150, are all of your friends and family going to be on the same protocol? Because how are you going to feel if you're the last man standing? What if you are the one who lives to be 150 and all of your kids and grandkids all passed away? Statistically, I mean, there's a lot of research that say not only, and we see this where one person dies and elderly, and then days or weeks later the spouse dies, right? Because that was kind of their reason for living. And the same thing is said for people that live to be 90 and above, that they are dealing with very serious depression because all their friends have passed away. And now you've lost your spouse, all of your, or the majority of your friends are gone, and their last days, and I actually know a couple of these people that are saying, I wish I would have gone first, or I wish I would have already gone. Like, these days are not worth it. And so I want to talk about what I know you found out about with connection and connectivity in that second. We'll get to that in a second. But this thing of having the goal of living forever without thinking about everything that entails. Were you having conversations with these researchers about this? Like, hey, what is the mental, emotional, and spiritual impact of someone going, well beyond 100 and who they may be leaving behind and what that's going to do for them or to them?
Yeah, I mean, I was convinced very early on that the science is real and that this is a real revolution, that this is happening right now in our lifetime. So the first act of the film is kind of establishing that, here are the major players in the space, people that you probably haven't heard of because they don't have a million Instagram followers, but are doing really great work and should be known, which is what I hope the film provides a platform for their work and people can start knowing who these people are and as trusted sources that they can go to get real information that aren't trying to sell you supplements along the way. So the first act of the film is just establishing that science and sharing that science in a way that I think is digestible to anyone, no matter what level of understanding you have currently of the science of longevity. And then it started to become obvious that there wasn't as much dialogue around, well, what happens next? And science is all about uh, s- answering questions, but you have what question that you're asking is so important. So, can we live forever is one question. But what I became very interested in, well, can we build a world where we do want to live forever? And that to me is where you start to see that pivot in the film to where we start getting deeper into what we now know is also a major crisis, not just in the United States, but around the world of anxiety, depression, and loneliness. Um, if we don't get a grasp on that side of things, then what we're going to have is a lot of anxious, miserable people that are living longer than ever before. And that just sounds like a recipe for disaster. And so it was very important that we bring in the into the conversation the idea of purpose and meaning, of connection, um, and making that a core longevity fundamental, which I think is often ignored in the conversation.
So to that end, I think a lot of people are familiar with the work of the Blue Zones, the book, the documentary, all of that, where we're talking about 5 different locations around the world where people are living not just longer, but longer, healthier, and happier. And the only true commonality they all have, because it's not diet, it's not climate,
Yeah,
right? The only true commonality that all 5 of these areas have is a sense of purpose and community.
that's right.
And so, to that end of what you're saying, is that being measured? Like, was that talked about in this documentary of, hey, when we're looking at all these biomarkers, we have to rate every bit as equally what is their support system like? What is, because that's gonna that's gonna impact everything, right? Who cares if you physically are healthy, but like we just said, mentally, you know, you regret
Yeah,
living so long.
yeah. It's a tough thing to quantify, which is also why the studies now we're starting to focus more on it. But how do you diagnose loneliness or if you go to your doctor and they're asking you, do you smoke, do you exercise, etc. They're not asking you, well, how are your relationships? That's also a lot of pressure to put on doctors who are already under immense pressure and are
And
trying not
aren't
to get
therapists, by the way.
exactly, and who aren't therapists. But when it comes to longevity, Dr. Sarah Centeno, who's in the film, who's a psychiatrist, who's really got a lot of amazing, inspiring, beautiful things to say. She talks about how the status of your relationship should be considered the fifth vital sign, which is, just as important as your blood pressure and your heart rate and your temperature. And so we do make a point of that to say, hey, we can't leave this part out. And it's just as important. And I have been to 4 of the 5 blue zones um, throughout just before even us making the film. I was just kind of curious about some of these places. I did spend a lot of time in Greece and Ikaria. And the one thing I did notice, which was really, interesting to me, is they weren't necessarily like fit looking people. There weren't any gyms on the part of the island I was. But what I did see is every morning I would walk down, to get a coffee, and you'd see people passing each other, beeping their horns, and you'd see a group of older people that were having coffee with one another, and then waving to the people as they drove by. You did get a sense that this was a community where people knew each other and took care of each other. And so that I think is very important. At the same time, the science of longevity is real. The medications and treatments and the greater understanding we have of diet, of exercise, of biomarkers, of now being able to intervene early to delay that onset, that stuff is also real. So it's like this whole world that you can do a rabbit hole down any one of these topics. And so the film, I hope, kind of provides an overview of all of it so that people can use it as a starting point to then dive deeper into whatever area that they're interested in.
So, because you brought it up about, hey, the science is real. Thank goodness, or I would be out of work. So, the science is real. There are things that you can do to improve your quality of health right now, wherever you are. Right? Forget about living longer. Just truly, we now have tools available to us to see what's happening before they play out, before they manifest into sickness and chronic degenerative disease. That said, I want to flip the other side of that coin too, because I also know some of these people that become so obsessed with these biomarkers and obsessed with all of this living that they stop living meaningfully. That now I'm not going out for pizza with my buddies anymore because that's just that's going to set me back a month. And somewhere and all of this, it feels like what we're talking about is how do we create balance? That yes, these things matter, but should they matter to the degree that you stop living and interacting in your world with your family and friends, in a meaningful way? And I think this also, I'm certain your documentary is taking that challenge on of once we take things too far and become obsessed, that in of itself becomes problematic.
Yeah, and it's also, I mean, it's a great marketing gimmick for the people that are saying, I'm going to monitor all this stuff, constantly, and this is how I'm going to live for, an extra 100 years. But I mean, the reason why it's kind of an interesting paradox is that, well, the only way for that not to be true is for them to die. So it's
Yeah.
like, I mean, like, how do you? So great, okay, well, as long as they're still alive, it's like you can say that because until you're dead, then there's no way to prove it, and obviously
Right.
there's not enough studies in the future. So what we try to do in the film is to also stress the importance that all of our lives and our bodies are different, and that, the real future of medicine, medicine 3.0, of what they're calling it, is much more customized. It's not kind of these blanket ideas and prescriptions. It's really understanding your own blood work, your own goals, and also it's so important for people, and I went through this myself, is to develop your own longevity philosophy. How do you get that balance? What are you willing to do and not do? I mean, I did watch the Brian Johnson documentary on Netflix, and I found it very sad. I wasn't particularly watching it like, oh, this is so cool. I was really kind of like, man, this is not the kind of life I want to live. And maybe somebody else thought the opposite. Or maybe when I'm 85, then I would feel differently. And I get all of that, but it's on each of us to start taking that responsibility and self-educating, taking action to, develop our own, not only our own philosophy, but to develop protocols around that and to have some sort of accountability. And I think the biomarkers and the tools that science is now providing, we finally have the resources to do that. And it's crazy to think that, even a couple decades ago, we didn't have those available. And
Yeah.
and so we can track some of this stuff, and how much you want to do it and how often you want to do it is really based upon your own philosophy and your own goals. But you have to think about it and create your own philosophy in order to make those kind of decisions. And now what we want to do is share, the science and those resources so that people can make those decisions, with an educated mind.
Exactly. And you're right. I mean, it is to each his own. I wouldn't want to live in a test tube either. But again, it's interesting that someone on this planet does because, Brian is providing a lot of data for us to
He is.
be able to check out, so
And
amazing.
I think it is also very interesting to watch. I think, and like I said earlier, I think it's important people are pushing the limits.
That's right.
You got to have the people that are trying to do the crazy moonshots. I think it's very important that we have those individuals and those
Yep.
companies. I mean,
Yep.
right now we've got 3 companies this year alone that are all FDA approved for human trials to create the first anti-aging drugs.
Right.
Which is just it's just a huge shift in the way that we're looking at things.
Right.
Um, and so, you wouldn't have that unless there were people that were saying, hey, can we create a drug that, actually focuses on aging itself. And so you got to have all of it. You got to have the hard
Yeah.
scientists who don't get enough of the credit, and you got to have the big thinkers. And then, hopefully people can find some sense of balance between all of that.
Yeah, and discernment, right? That every
That's
person
right.
is standing back saying, "Where do I personally fit into this?" Another interesting aspect of this, and I started this by saying to David before I hit record that I'm in these conversations all the time with people, but out of the, let's say, 7 or 8 different topics that you and I are chatting about, I usually chat about them with 7 or 8 different people. Your documentary is fascinating because
Thank you.
you're really touching on everything. And another one of those, which is just a fascinating aspect to this living forever or 150, whatever we want to talk about. Let's talk about the concept of a bucket list. When we had a timeline, and let's call that 80 years old, right? Plus or minus, that's the average life expectancy age, male or female combined. So now, when you're, say, 50, 60, people start really thinking, hey, what did the thing? Did I ever go to Europe? Did I ever get this thing done? I wanted to travel with my family or take a cruise to Alaska, whatever it is, that there is something to be said around a sense of urgency and being tied to purpose and meaning and people taking action and doing things. So I really wonder the psychology behind, if I think till I have 200, what am I going to be living like when I'm 50, 60, 70, 80 if I think I'm only halfway there? You know what I mean? Because that would be the same thing of how did you live when you were 30 and 40? You weren't worried about a bucket list at 30 and 40. You know what I mean? And it's kind
Yeah.
of, are we going to wind up doing the same thing where we've lost a sense of urgency? Does that matter? And then the other whole conversation that tags into this is, who's paying for this? So if we worked until 60 to be able to pay for our life if we live to 80 or 90, are we all saying we're now going to work to 120 to be able to afford to live to 100? Like, how exciting is that idea for
Yeah.
most people if you're not doing what you love? You know what
Sure.
I mean? You and I are blessed with, we get to do what we love, or we've certainly chosen that life. But when you stop and think about that, the financial aspect of this is also no joke.
There's a lot to unpack there. Pretty much, what we learned along the way is that our current society, day by day, was really created for people with a lifespan of around 60. We're still kind of living in a world that was in the 1950s, whether it's our transportation systems,
Yep.
commuting by cars, sedentary lifestyles that have gotten worse with technology. Retirement was not supposed to last 40 years. That just was not part of the game plan.
Right.
Finances, of course, is a big part of that as well. Also, just architecture, sustainability. How do we feed people? We've got fertility problems, especially in the United States. How do we take care of these people as they're aging? In the film, there's a scene where we were in Tokyo, Japan, which has a massive demographic issue. They have so many people that are aging out, and there's not enough young people to take care of them. There's
Yep.
no labor force.
Yep.
And so they've had to be creative with solutions. So what are they doing? They're bringing in robots to come in and sing and dance with them. There's robotic pets, that have like fake fur and I'm watching this. I'm like, man, this is crazy. But then what gets really should be a wake up call to Americans is that our country has the same percentage as far as the
Yes.
same demographic problem, except it's at scale. Japan's a small country, so they can manage it much better, and they're already experimenting. We're completely unprepared for what happens next. And so it is exciting. It's also daunting because this is why it's becoming a $1 trillion sector. Everything has to be rewritten because we're pretty much giving people an extra active life, bonus
Yep.
years.
Yep.
And think about leisure. Already we know that if we're on our phones too much or in front of screens too much, that it's harming our brains. People's greatest fear now is not cancer, it's dementia as they get older.
Yep.
So we have to rethink reading and writing, intergenerational friendships. How do we solve these major problems? We're not hearing enough about that. And if the science is real, which I think the film makes a very strong argument to show that this is really happening, people are going to continue to live longer. It's already happening. We can see it in the data. So, let's start thinking about how to make that quality of life better, and rethink our current structures and systems, which we're not doing
Right.
yet. You don't hear the politicians talking about it. We're always hearing about the new drugs and the new treatments. We're not hearing about, well, hey, we've got a major fertility problem in the United States. And, how are we going to take care of these people? How are we going to have a labor force with younger societies being able to make a living for long periods of time? How are people going to support themselves in their later years? It all has to be rethought. And so it's also very exciting because we get to be the people to make those changes and kind of redesign what it means to be human in the modern world. And I find that really exciting and ultimately hopeful. And the challenge I think the film makes is to, be a part of it as an individual and to start thinking this way and acknowledging that this is the biggest paradigm shift in the history of our lives, and also something that's radically going to change just what it means to be alive right now.
Well, it does. And, you mentioned Japan. And so we're going to bring AI into this here for a second because there are wide swaths of people for varying reasons that have declared themselves. I'm sure they have a name for it, but they're no longer going to be in relationship with other humans. They're
Yeah.
they're having online relationships. I mean, I think somebody married
Yep.
an AI, bot, but having these full life. I mean, it's their plan. Life relationships with AI robots, and boy, we could stir up a firestorm on this conversation alone, because to the brain, we know this, that visualization tells us that what the brain believes to be true has the same impact as though it is. It doesn't know the difference of what you're imagining and what is real. So if the brain over time just is believing, here I'm in this conversation every day and somebody's welcoming me as I walk in the door, and I know there is so much pushback on that, but I want to reflect back on this very serious factor of loneliness when people are aging and friends and family, start dying off, or they don't live near friends or family, is all of the sudden now we have these AI robots that are companions. And here's a whole nother, there are so many facets to this living for forever concept that AI is going to continue in light speed just in the last handful of months. I mean, one day goes by and 15 new apps have come out that can, change the way you live your life. So this as well, when it comes to connection and longevity, is a huge thing when you think, well, there aren't enough friends to go around. Well, I don't know.
It's
you
this
know?
is yeah, I mean, there's a reason why, a company like Tesla is starting to make, human like robots, that are going to be more involved in the day to day. I mean, this is happening as well. Whether or not that actually can help somebody in a relationship or make them feel less lonely, I think it's worth exploring. We just don't know. Intuitively, it feels like, oh, there's no way that that could work. How do you replace a human? But loneliness is a really serious problem. We
Right.
have to explore every option. It's the equivalent of smoking a pack of cigarettes per day, if at its worst. It increases chronic illnesses. It causes all kinds of major problems. It also just makes life miserable. We
Right.
know this now, and we're only just now beginning to develop a vernacular of how to diagnose it and what to do about it. And there is no easy way to do something about it. That's why it's something that that really has to be thought through. Um, I do think there's some really creative ways that need to be taken more seriously. For example, intergenerational friendships, as I mentioned earlier. You've got younger people that are lonelier and anxious and depressed, and you've got older people that are also, the same
Mhm.
way. Well, one of us, a possible solution is to bring those together and have more mentorships and relationships with people that are older than you or younger than you. Um, it's people like the feeling of being helpful. They like the feeling that you're teaching somebody something that you have value. Younger people like the idea that they're learning from somebody, who's got more wisdom from them. How do you do that in a time of social media and kind of the digitized world we live in? I don't know, but if we are to have a healthier, happier future, that's certainly going to be, I think, part of it is more widespread programs that match you up, not for dating, but for having senses of community and for meeting people that can have a positive impact in your long-term life.
Yeah, I agree. And you are 100% right. I remember Google did a study, I believe it was last year, surveying their employees, and they've got tens of thousands of them, obviously, and said, hey, what's your number one struggle? And 80% of all Google employees said anxiety.
Wow.
And these are people in their 30s, right? And so, yeah, this isn't just an older person problem. This is across the board and separate from the longevity issue. It is something that we need to have front and center. But certainly, if we are adding longevity to it and living longer, to live longer and not happier and healthier makes absolutely no sense to me at all.
Yeah, we
So,
just we just did an article on our Substack, I think like last week. Dr. Thomas Lewis, who's in the film, he's a brilliant neuroscientist, psychiatrist, also the author of a book called A General Theory of Love, co-author of that book. which is a fantastic book, by the way. But he dives into the connection between longevity and mindfulness and meditation. Um, it pretty much hits every single category of longevity health, not just for the sake of mental health by itself, but also for longevity. So, that should be taken, I think, a lot more seriously. I certainly did not realize there was that much data to support it. And so I was realized, oh, wow, this is not something I'm doing in my day-to-day life. And this is obviously a lot more beneficial than I realized. And so, the learning never stops.
Right.
As all of these new studies keep coming out and we can start identifying patterns.
So, because you bring that up, what are some of the things that you, after all of this, have chosen to implement and integrate into your life based on what you learned?
Most important thing is regular blood work. Um, that I just can't stress that enough. I was going through the process and, I was like, oh, I go to the gym or whatever. I'm healthy. I don't need to be doing, unless there's a problem, I don't want to go deal with that. After about 2 years into the process, especially traveling, I mean, making documentaries is quite stressful and a lot of travel. And, it's kind of a blur when you're making it. You're just trying to, get it done and move. And it is a lot of stress. But um, the doctors that I've gotten to know, that I'm very fortunate to kind of have them in my Rolodex, the people that are in the film, kind of like you should probably get your blood work done and kind of see where you are and establish a baseline. And then the second part of what I learned is how you evaluate the data. Because if you get your blood work done and you're looking at it and it's just kind of like a normal blood test, well, what is normal in America usually means sick. So
Exactly. I'm so glad you said that, because how do we get normal? Is it like the bell curve of everyone in the
that's
United
right.
States, when we are the most obese, take more drugs and medication than anybody. So if you're average on that bell curve,
Yeah,
red flags better be going off, which
that's
is not
right.
what people are taught, by the
They're
way.
not. They're not. And so the question you ask is not, okay, how do I stack up against these other people? You stack up against, how do you optimize your own situation? Okay. If
Yep.
you do work out and you do certain things, and of course you've got the standard metrics, but why is this particular test this way? And that's not probably as good as it could be. And then understanding that there's a whole new paradigm to look at this. We now know that the connection between aging and inflammation is so it's so important to understand that connection. And so there is blood work that you can get to identify, it's also why a lot of these GLPs and other things are actually now starting to become considered longevity drugs. It's not just for the weight loss, it's because of the anti-inflammatory effect.
Right.
And we see so many drugs now that are being, reallocated towards longevity from other specific problems. And a lot of it comes down to inflammation. That's also, diet, exercise, all of that. It's anti-inflammatory properties. And so evaluating your blood work with the paradigm of longevity in mind, and not just here's how it stacks up against, these kind of standards, especially in America, really gives you a completely different perspective on your health. And you understand, man, I'm not anywhere near where I should be. And in fact, there's probably some red flags, that I'm not dealing with. And so those are the two things for me: getting blood work and then evaluating them, ideally with longevity professionals who can
Yes.
help you reframe it to where you're really looking at it for you, your body, your health, your lifestyle, not just against kind of a standard bell curve.
And, you would think that I paid you to say all that. The main work that I do here at the retreat center is
You did it?
all
You, did,
geared.
you didn't pay me
I
to
did.
do
I did.
that?
It's all
Okay.
is all geared towards inflammation. So
Yes.
thank you. I'll use your snippet as an ad for me. So
Okay.
well done. Uh, but you are absolutely right. And another thing that you just mentioned that I do want to touch on, it's not looking at a number like what's my level of magnesium in isolation. What is the whole of you doing? Why does that number say what it does? It doesn't mean go take more magnesium. It's why is that the way it is? And we do have to look at the whole. Again, that is not our typical, Western medicine sick model. So all of this is absolutely phenomenal. So In the interim, before the movie comes out, where can people follow you? Where can people, you're talking about different ways that you're trying to get some information out because people are very eager. So what are all the ways people can follow you, be notified when the movie comes out, and stay in close touch?
People can go to foreveryoung.film to where they can get updated on the film release. They can get added to our Forever Young Substack, which, by the way, just we got notification a couple days ago. We're in top 1% of trending health and wellness Substacks. So we've really been working hard at trying to get people the answers to questions using a lot of the people from the film as well as the top
Right.
scientists. But it is, we like to say, longevity insights with a healthy dose of humanism. So it's not just the science, it really is too the existential questions we face, the societal challenges. There's so much more to this revolution and to the challenges and hopes for it than just, what new drugs and treatments are out there. And so foreveryoung.film, you can also sign up for the Substack. There's a link to it from there. And soon enough, we'll have more release dates, starting with Apple this summer.
Perfect. Well, I will have all of that in show notes. So if you are out and about or at the gym right now, working out as you should be, then don't worry. That will be in notes and you can check that out later. And David, I close the show the same way with everybody. I can't wait to hear your answer to this based on everything that you've been through in the last few years. What is one thing that you absolutely believe to be true?
Mm, that is a that is a well, it's not directly connected, but I will say that actually it is connected. I would say after spending all of this time, I've also traveled all around the world for in my career. 15 years of traveling globally. I've gotten to meet a lot of interesting people, see a lot of different ways that people live. It's so easy to get caught up if you just are looking at your phone or your feed and just think that we live in a really terrible world and that there's so much chaos and that it can be very depressing to think that this is the world. The one thing I know to be true is that there's goodness in the world and that it's out there and that we have to make that choice to know that it exists and to focus on it. And so when I'm finding these scientists and I'm seeing like why are they devoting their lives to something like ketones or to metabolism or something like this, almost all of them have the same answer. They had, a relative that passed away too early and there wasn't enough detection for it. And so, they want people to have better lives. And to me, I find that so incredibly inspiring that there are people out there that, aren't just billionaires trying to live forever. There's really good people out there who are doing great work so that you can live longer, healthier lives with the people that you care about. And I think that's just, hopefully people will also get that takeaway when they watch the film that really it's a love story to humanity more than it is a documentary about science.
That is wonderful. And I'm thrilled that we are ending on this note. I have long said that there's plenty of bad out there, but there is always plenty of good, and it just depends on what you're looking for. And why would we not only look for the good, but contribute to that end? And you are obviously doing that with this
Thank you.
film
So,
and the
so are you.
people.
So are you, by
Well,
the way.
thanks. 20 bucks is in the mail to you. But truly, thank you for the effort. I know I have a couple of friends that are documentary filmmakers, and it is far more work than what most of us could ever imagine. So thank you for the work that you do, the people that you've interviewed. It is something that I think every one of us should watch with a different lens of discernment than what we're seeing on Instagram of you're going to take this pill and live forever and not consider everything that goes along with that. And I know that your film is going to encourage people to really think about not only the future, but how they're living their life today as well, which contributes to that longevity or lack thereof. So thank you so much again for your time. I appreciate you very much for being here.
And thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
Absolutely. And thank you everybody so much for tuning into this episode of the Game Changer podcast.